Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what is due to be a very fascinating conversation about revolutionising recruitment and a data-led insight into ChatGPT's impact right now, both in terms of candidate use as well as our employer usage. Thank you to Arctic Shores for bringing us their latest research. And we're also going to have a panel conversation today with a couple of key colleagues from the industry who are going to be sharing some insights with us. And then we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A as well. As we go through the presentation and come into the panel conversation, please do feel free to use the chat functionality if you have any comments, any thoughts, any questions. And we'll also have the Q&A functionality running throughout today so that we can come back to those questions when we get to the panel session. So I'm now going to start by introducing the colleagues that will be with us today. Firstly, Estelle, can I introduce yourself from Arctic Shores, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name's Estelle McCartney, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Arctic Shores, which is the task-based psychometric assessment provider. And in recent months, I've been working with colleagues at Arctic Shores on understanding and thinking about and conducting some research about both the impact of Gen AI in terms of how candidates are thinking about it and using it, and then what that might mean for early careers recruitment and our approaches and tools. Looking forward to sharing that with you this afternoon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Emma, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Emma Henderson. I am Global Head of Early Careers at PA Consulting. I've worked in the early careers industry now for around 15, 16 years, so quite a long time. So I've definitely seen a lot of change in that period. But yeah, excited to be here to share some thoughts and kind of hear Estelle's research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. And last but by no means least, Joe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. A pleasure to be here, everybody. My name's Joe. I am Strategy and Operations Director at Bright Network Technology Academy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bright Network as the early careers platform. I work specifically on what we call the Bright Network Technology Academy side, where effectively we layer on a technology graduate scheme. We put people through a 12-week boot camp, taking them from kind of low code or maybe low confidence in their ability to code, and then kind of creating them into software engineers over the course of a 2-year program. So yeah, been involved with that for a couple of years now, and yeah, see a lot of candidates pass through our application processes, both for us and then I guess for other clients as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for the introductions. I really can't wait to hear the latest research and then hear your reflections on it, Emma and Joe, as well. So, Estelle, are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Thank you. So if we can just go on to the next slide then. Wally. So I'm thinking about how generative AI is shaping early careers recruitment. There's 3 things I want to try and cover in a whistle-stop tour in the next 15 minutes. So the first piece of research that we did at Arctic Shores was to find out what 2,000 students and recent graduates think about generative AI and how they're using it. We then also conducted some scientific research looking at which parts of the selection process might be most vulnerable in light of how candidates are adopting and using generative AI. And then the third thing I want to share with you is kind of some tips and thoughts on where to go next based on those findings. So let's take a look at what we found out from the students. So we researched 2,000 students and asked students and recent graduates for their views. And what we discovered was really interesting. The first thing is that Gen AI is absolutely here and being used. 72% of students that we questioned are already using some form of generative AI every single week. And that is actually up 50% since a similar survey was done in May. So we can see a really rapid increase in its adoption. Furthermore, 7 out in 10 of those students that we spoke to said that they'll use ChatGPT to complete an application or assessment in the next 12 months. And actually, almost 20% were already using it. And then finally, thirdly, we discovered that 1/3 of those candidates would not work for an employer who told them that they couldn't use Gen AI in a selection process. And another third would be put off working for that employer because they would question their general progressiveness. So I think the key takeaway from this is that ChatGPT is now part of everyday life for students and graduates. And that led us on then to think about what are the implications of that for recruitment. And in some ways, the news is really positive in that generative AI is starting to level the playing field and potentially boosting productivity. So 23% of the students that 23% of students that use ChatGPT are from Black or mixed heritage background. And actually that was slightly higher than students from other groups. And students who are neurodiverse also displayed a tendency to use ChatGPT more. So there's an indication there that ChatGPT might help some groups within our recruitment community. Furthermore, 44% of the students that we surveyed felt that Gen AI could help to level the playing field. So kind of think about it as that helpful parent who not every candidate has to the same degree. And indeed, the same amount of students felt that they just fully expect to be embracing generative AI in their future workplace. However, we wanted to give some really clear findings and insights into what that might mean for implications of assessment use in the recruitment space. We were really mindful that there'd been quite a lot of debate and discussion as to whether this use of ChatGPT renders some kinds of assessments obsolete. And we really wanted to sort of move away from some of the heat of that debate and shed some light. But what we did was we commissioned our senior data scientist at Arctic Shores to conduct a really comprehensive research project over the course of the summer. And we worked with 2 UCL postgraduate data researchers, and we undertook a really systematic testing of the main psychometric assessment types. We also had a look at our own assessments at Arctic Shores. And we came across some really, really interesting findings that we think have got some major implications for how we think about how we gather authentic insights into candidates through the use of assessments. And I want to share with you just some of those findings now. I don't have time to go through everything, but we will share the full report with you. So if we go on to the next slide, one of the things that we discovered is that when you use ChatGPT, it will become much harder to see a candidate's true potential in the selection process, because its use can mask that insight you get to a candidate's aptitude. So the first set of assessments that we used ChatGPT against were traditional text-based aptitude assessments. The first set was a group of traditional text-based verbal reasoning assessments. And we applied and used 2 different versions of ChatGPT. You might be aware that version 3.5, which is a free version, there's a second version, ChatGPT 4, which is a pay for. It's about £20 a month. And what we discovered was that the free version scored higher than 71% of candidates, and the paid for version, ChatGPT 4, scored an incredible 96.8% higher than average candidates. We did the same test using a situational judgment test, obviously text-based situational judgment test. And again, we saw that ChatGPT free version scored between the 50th and 60th percentile, but the paid for version scored in the 70th percentile, which obviously is also the kind of common cutoff point. So clearly ChatGPT can be used, and it's quite simple to use, and we've got some really interesting videos showing how we use it. It's incredibly easy to apply ChatGPT and use it when conducting those types of text-based assessments. So we then turned our attention to personality assessments, and it was a really fascinating insight here. So the first thing we discovered is that actually ChatGPT itself exhibits a sort of a default personality across both the freed and the paid models that is skewed towards socially desirable traits. So it's highly agreeable and conscientious, a proxy for things like being cooperative and organised, but it scores lower on neuroticism, a proxy for low resilience and emotional instability. So in short, ChatGPT itself won't get upset or stressed out easily, which I guess is good to know. But we also discovered that users with little or no training can actually adapt ChatGPT's personality very easily with almost perfect accuracy. So candidates can get ChatGPT to instantly change its score on a personality assessment with very simple prompting in a way that is very smart. For example, it recognises that to be less neurotic, it also needs to be more open. And ChatGPT can quickly and easily extract desirable traits from a job description that a candidate puts into ChatGPT and adapt its personality to suit them. So, for example, it displays higher extroversion for a sales role or conscientiousness for a software engineering role. And when it does this, a lot of scores quickly start looking the same because all employers are looking for the same traits. And this could mean that quickly that all scores will start to look the same if you're using text-based, question-based personality assessments, really kind of reducing their impactfulness as a sifting school. There's a minor difference in personality in performance between the free and the paid versions. So I guess the implications of this for TA leaders is that they'll soon find themselves with, struggling to see candidates who can make it through to the interview stages or potentially even being hired who might not have the personality alignment that you really need for that role. So I guess it's really thinking about how do you adapt your selection process to be able to see the real candidate. The other implication, if we go on to the next slide, is just thinking about the implications of this for social mobility. So, there's been quite a lot of discussion that actually ChatGPT could be the great leveler, giving access for everybody to that sort of free and expert advisor to help them with their application process. And I suppose at first sight, there's some merit in that argument. But what we discovered from what I've shared with you, can see that there was a clear distinction in performance between the free version and the paid for version. And going back to our survey of 2,000 graduates, unsurprisingly, we found that only 15% of students were using the paid for model. 38% found that, felt that £20 a month was just too expensive for them. But the key thing is that of those that are paying for it, 2/3 came from a higher household income group. So there is a real risk here that some of the steps and progress we've made in helping to reduce or to bridge social mobility will be undone by the use of ChatGPT. So I guess just on the next slide, to think about the sort of the big debate of whether ChatGPT is a blessing or a curse. I guess in embracing its usage in the selection process, we're going to give some candidates a leg up, but we will also be holding some candidates back. Its use, I suppose, at some level provides an opportunity and potential to demonstrate great learning agility. But it can be used to really undermine traditional text-based question selection techniques. And I guess then that is part of the reason why, if we go to the next slide, a survey that Hung Lee recently shared showed that almost 2/3 of TA leaders are now reviewing and are thinking about reviewing their selection process in light of this dramatic uptake of ChatGPT and the implications that it's got. Interestingly, 30% are trying to deter or detect AI usage, which could again mean disproportionately penalising underrepresented groups or turning people off employer brands. 14% at the forefront are already thinking about how to adapt their selection process. I guess a quarter don't believe there's a problem. And I suppose from our research, we might suggest that they're risking compromising their selection methods. But it certainly seems that this is a key issue, and I guess part of the reason why we're discussing it today. So just if we go on to the next slide, it presents that conundrum. What do we do? And I guess we'll be talking about this in a second. Do you say, actually, we're going to go down the deter and detect route? Or do you take the kind of fundamental redesign route? If we look at option 1 on the next slide, please, the deter option is around educating candidates that using Gen AI will obscure the real them, and there's definitely potential to introduce that into your setup process. And with detect, there are definitely tools that can be used to monitor, to flag suspect responses. Although I think we touched on the fact that this can also impact certain groups disproportionately. And actually, what we're starting to see is that there is a pretty high occurrence in some of those tools. Are still, they're not perfect. We're seeing that there are sort of 2 out of 10 times AI detection tools have produced a false positive. So I think really our thinking and advice on that is that the inaccuracy of deter and detect means that it should only be used, I guess, in the short term, as I think there's some unintentional consequences that could follow through from taking that approach. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I guess our counsel and advice really is that the longer term, more robust option and solution is really about going down that redesign. So replacing those assessments and tools and processes, and that would include not just assessments, but also CV use, which are incredibly vulnerable, to move towards assessment design that is non-verbal. So is not open to use. ChatGPT can't complete the task or the assessment. You consider and ask to move to those assessments where there's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer. So be less binary in what you're looking at and scoring at. And then assessments where there's an element of refreshed and novel items throughout the assessment, which makes it harder then, and more difficult and more challenging for students to use ChatGPT. But just finally, I just want to share with you on the next slide an approach that we've been taking and working through with some of our partner organisations. And I think it's as a sort of a starting point where the world of ChatGPT can feel quite overwhelming, is sort of the first step that we're advising is to think about conducting a sort of a vulnerability audit of your own process. And this slide here, which we'll obviously be sharing with you, kind of provides a structure and approach for conducting that audit, and where we see, and we've bucketed types of tools and approaches that are more vulnerable to ChatGPT, those that are kind of medium on the scale, and those have got a low vulnerability, and then map them alongside the level and skill that a candidate would need to have with ChatGPT to be able to use it to complete that type of assessment. And then thinking about the sort of the relative sophistication of that assessment model. and sort of looking and reviewing your own process, and mapping and identifying where your vulnerabilities are probably our sort of recommended first step in getting your head around what this new brave world of ChatGPT and Gen AI means for all of us in early careers recruitment. That's it for me.
Super. Thank you so much for taking us through that. Some really fascinating findings there. And obviously, this is a really hot topic for so many people. So we're now going to move into the panel conversation, and then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A. So I'd really be keen to hear, Emma and Joe, your initial reflections on the findings that Arctic Shore have just shared with us, and in terms of how that's kind of feeling for you in your roles and working in the way that you do with early careers talent. Emma, do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah. So I guess hearing all of that just makes me really realise that we don't all have the answers at the moment, and I don't think anyone knows what the exact right answer is and what to do. I think all this research is just really super useful for us to have more of an awareness of how candidates are using it, the potential kind of negative impacts of using it from a diversity perspective, but also the positives. For me, it's about kind of being aware that it's there, kind of assessing this as we go through the next recruitment year, and then starting to think ahead, okay, what have we seen this year that can impact next year? And to your point, Estelle, you know, I don't think we should just detect and deter, can't speak. I wonder whether we should more redesign but also detect. I don't really know, and I don't have all the answers, but it certainly made me realize that it's okay to not have all the answers. Well, that's my initial view. I'm going with it.
Absolutely, Emma. I think you voiced the feeling of many probably on this call and far beyond that, in terms of not having all the answers, but let's have the conversations and let's try and help each other with this research to figure out what next. I particularly like the idea of redesign in that comment as well. So Joe, any initial comments and reflections from yourself, please?
Yeah, I think kind of echoing Emma, really, it's super interesting research, because I think it kind of shines a light on things that you may not already be able to detect yourself within the recruitment process. We think we know how people are using ChatGPT as part of our recruitment process, and yet ultimately we recognize that this software is really like a year old. That's when kind of ChatGPT first started coming around, and I keep seeing more and more innovative uses of it, and it will start to become more and more sophisticated. So I think we're also in a very early phase, I would say, in terms of how we're seeing it kind of crawl into our recruitment processes. I think at the moment we're feeling okay. We feel like we've got a diversified enough process with lots of different things, which I'm sure we'll get into as we discuss this a little bit more. But you know, there definitely are some stages which we recognize are more open to utilizing these tools than others, and we've had to kind of weigh some pros and cons of actually what are we trying to test here, and does having ChatGPT make a noticeable difference to somebody being able to get past this stage, or are we looking for something slightly different?
Thank you. And just to pick up on that, Joe, obviously, as you say, this is a year old, but then the adoption rates and the speed at which things are changing is pretty interesting, I think, as an employer as well as a candidate. Wondering if either you or Emma had some initial reflections on how that is kind of starting to make you think forward in terms of what the future holds and how you might want to kind of adopt or enable this kind of ChatGPT and generative AI usage, both within your processes, but also just thinking about that from the candidate usage as well.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. So I guess thinking ahead to how we might use, I mean, at PA, there's a real focus on us, you know, using AI with our clients, you know, and being kind of sort of better consultants and having a more of a kind of human-centric approach to using AI and supporting our clients with the kind of ever-adapting world in this space. And so, you know, one of the ways that we do that internally is with some sort of prompt engineering training. So to what you were talking about earlier, Estelle, is, you know, yes, people can already start to use ChatGPT and realize what they can say to kind of change its personality, but actually, you know, our consultants are being trained on how to use it to ask better questions, to get better responses. You know, so
Great.
actually, is there something that we can do in our recruitment process to have an assessment like that? You know, do we say, here's a question or a problem, we want you to use AI to answer this question, and we want to see, you know, what kind of results come out? You know, that to me is more of an assessment of, you know, embracing the technology that is there. It's relevant to what we're going to be asking our consultants to do when they actually land with us and they work with us. And maybe we then assess, okay, how well can someone use ChatGPT? Now, the only danger and issue with that is, you know, if those responses are different depending on the free version versus the paid version, and actually does that then bring up the whole where we see a drop in those kind of candidates from lower socioeconomic backgrounds being successful in that field? I don't know yet. And, you know, we haven't got the question in, so we don't, you know, I can't say either way at the moment. But we'd need to be really mindful of, if we did bring something in like that, how can we ensure that it doesn't kind of adversely impact any of our kind of any demographic groups that we, you know, don't want to impact, obviously. So that's just one thought for me for the future. And we aren't doing it now, but it's an idea on how we might use it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's interesting to hear how you're using it with your consultants to be a tool and an enabler to improve their consulting skills, and then how that could then manifest into a part of your assessment process in the future. But your point there as well about the disparity between the paid and the non-paid version, and we saw that in Estelle's research as well. You know, I was quite surprised by how significant proportionally the difference in percentile results were actually between the two. So again, that is potentially going to cause a challenge if you're trying to level the playing field around things like social mobility. Joe, I think you might want to jump in as well and maybe add a few comments.
So I think we're in a phase where we very much feel that, you know, there's no stopping the tide on this. And in the same way that we wouldn't ban our candidates from using Google to do research and better strengthen their applications, you know, categorically, ChatGPT and other Gen AI tools are probably going to start to replace, to a greater or lesser extent, some of those tools that are coming in. You know, rather than Googling and going onto your company's values page, you're just probably going to type it in and you're going to get a generated response, and that's probably what it's going to be. I think what we're starting to do with our assessment process, and what we're really starting to see, which is quite interesting, is that historically our lowest quality apps used to be the ones that said less. Now our lowest quality apps, generally speaking, if they've used Gen AI, are saying a lot, but they're not saying a lot very specifically. And it's those kind of responses that we're now starting to kind of veer away from, because we're finding that actually there's a real lack of specificity in some of the answers that they're doing. You know, I'm talking our first stage of the application, where obviously we're trying to get a commitment of somebody. We want to deter somebody from just kind of one-click applying. We want serious applicants to come into the program. If somebody's just kind of auto-filled that through a generation of literally copying and pasting our question into ChatGPT, which we see more times than we would like, that's something that we're going to screen out. It's a really obvious use of it. But if somebody has maybe blended a response using some of the stuff that's come through, actually we're pretty, you know, receptive to that. It shows that they've done some research. It shows that they've put it into their own words and applied it to their own kind of stuff. And, you know, as it gets more and more, as it gets better at kind of ripping stuff from your CV, which I've seen it do, and, you know, then applying that, you know, how sustainable is that? But I think for the moment we're happy with that bar and that level, and I think we just know that it's a shifting bar. Basically, we'll start to see more stuff coming through, similar formats, similar structures. All of a sudden, we'll kind of start to understand why that's happening and what it is.
Can I jump in there as well? Is that right? So we've seen similar. So we've only had our applications open about 5 weeks, and so in the last kind of 2 weeks, we started to screen our video responses from our one of our strengths-based assessments. And what we are starting to see is, to your point, Joe, around those really long responses, you know, people that are really obviously have just dumped in that question into ChatGPT in the 2 minutes that they've got and just read it out. And we've done it ourselves. We've dropped them into the chat, and we have standard responses, and we share that with all of our screeners. So we go, if someone has literally just copied it in and reading it out, you can see what that would look like. We've also put it in and said, you know, here's the question, can you answer this? can you summarize the answer in a paragraph as if you were responding to a video response question? You know, trying to think what our candidates would be putting in there. And we have seen some really obvious people reading out the script. And whilst we don't say to people, I mean, there is an integrity statement actually in our strengths-based assessment, you know, saying they won't use it, but generally we aren't saying don't use it. But it's that lack of personality, that lack of engagement, that lack of authenticity that really shows. And some people read out those scripts, and because they've not written it themselves or had time to read it, they're not even flowing properly with the kind of paragraph, and they'll not pause when they should pause in normal conversation. It just doesn't feel natural because it's not their words. And so there may be others that use it and have better prompts, but they are more authentic in their responses because they're drawing from their own previous experiences. Or they might say, when I worked in this bakery, I did this, and they bring that into their responses. So yes, we can't say that people aren't using it, and we don't have absolute proof at all, but it is very obvious for people that are just reading out a monotone, stilted script, and actually they aren't bringing like a really engaged, authentic personality or their own like touch to the question, and so they aren't successful, and we don't kind of progress with those candidates. So it is interesting to see, and we didn't have this level of it last year, so that the fact that it has come on so quickly is just, in the first 5 weeks for screening, it's actually like blown our minds a little bit. So we've had a bit of a kind of screening meeting on it already to go, what's our stance, what are we talking about, what are we seeing? And I think we'll continue to do that as the months go on.
I think just on that point, there probably needs to be quite a lot done on the candidate education side of things. So let's not forget that whilst this is like a new phenomena for us, it's also a new phenomena for them. Like, they have all the answers directly at their fingertips. And I think what needs to happen is an understanding that, you know, Emma, in 2 minutes, cramming a script and then reading that verbatim is just never going to go down well, is it, on a video interview? Like, it's not going to work for you, or you're probably the best, you know, news anchor in the world if you can make it work for you. What you need is a much better like understanding of like how you can add to your knowledge as you go through an assessment process. And it's probably something that, you know, we'll probably start producing, certainly on the Bright Network side of things, tips for using you know, Gen AI as part of the application process, because it absolutely is additive, but only when used like smartly. You know, like it's never going to, it's going to detract from the quality of what you're doing if you're really not using it in a bespoke way.
Yeah, so that there's more education there, isn't there? Maybe employers need to do more of that, or maybe, you know, universities or career services need to be sharing. You know, employers are aware that you're going to use it, so think about how you use it and what that looks like. So yeah, I agree with that.
Can I just jump in there? I think it's a really interesting part on the education piece, because there's definitely some really, really interesting content out there that's been produced by candidates on TikTok, actually showing and educating potential candidates, how to use ChatGPT to complete written assessments, or even to do video interviews. And it really, you know, it's really quite astounding. So I think the idea that actually companies and those of us that are recruiting, I think there is a little bit, we need to make sure that there is some of that broader education piece and content out there. Otherwise, all of the content and the advice is going to be in the direction of, hey, here's how you can use it to, you know, to progress in the jobs that you're applying for. I think just listening to both Em and Joe, I think you've both touched on, I think, what are the two kind of fundamental areas that we feel that ChatGPT is driving. I guess the first one is that, you know, I think our research demonstrated this, and I think we got a flavour of it from the stories you've just been telling and the experience you've been telling, that what is true is that it's becoming harder, more complex, could be more nuanced to really capture like the true ability of a candidate, and kind of getting an authentic insight into that candidate in this world of ChatGPT. And so that's kind of, I suppose, part of, we all want to give every candidate the best opportunity to shine and to see their authentic self. And it's causing us all to stop and think and consider, you know, what tools do we use? What are the right tools for the right moment? You know, how do we how do we make sure that we're creating a great candidate experience that isn't biased, but also enables us to really be getting that authentic insight? And then I think the second area, and this was something that you picked on when you were talking about the way that you're already training and thinking about what are the skills that people that work at PA need in this world of Gen AI. And I guess that it's really highlighting that the future of work requires, I think, particularly different cognitive abilities from the past. So, the sort of the idea that, if a 2-1 that you need, and that will demonstrate whether somebody's going to be a good future and a good fit for your company. I think we've moved from that. Now in this world of AI, the best candidates are going to have soft skills, like their ability to learn, to kind of unlearn, to relearn, to have critical thinking, to be problem solvers, to be able to adapt, to change, are going to become much more the sort of the things that we should be assessing for throughout the process. And I think that was probably true even before ChatGPT, but I think the developments and the direction it's going is making all of that even more true than it was before ChatGPT's launch.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we do look at a kind of a strengths and behaviour based process. I mean, we obviously assess for technical ability for some of our kind of core roles that require that, but generally we are looking for people to be more kind of curious and that can adapt and that have a kind of growth mindset and will look at something and know that it might be different in a year's time and grow with technology, with the world, with clients, so it is really important. And this has just changed massively in like a year, in 2 years. It's come on. And I met with the kind of global head of AI at PA, and he said by 2025, a lot of what we do, not just at PA but in the world, will be driven by AI and will be driven, decisions that when we're making something, designing something, AI will be behind it. And so if we aren't understanding how to use it, we aren't teaching people to use it, we aren't embracing it, then we will be behind. It is the future. We're moving from kind of more digital to a kind of AI future. So yeah, it's fascinating, but I definitely think we do need to sort of embrace it. It is here, and how we do that we don't all know, but we're getting there.
I think that's go on, Joe. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I'd probably echo that. We're quite lucky to, I think, a certain extent where we're looking for people to join our boot camps, and we're probably not looking for the traditional people that would be joining a boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking at those that are coming from a computer science background. We're looking at those that want to get into tech but maybe haven't directly studied it. So, Estelle, we're looking for those people, as you said, that maybe have the baseline behaviors or skills for kind of learning and adapting as part of a group environment. And that's, broadly speaking, kind of what we're looking for as they're going through that process. And for instance, we use a video interview, but more often than not, the video interview, I'm looking for how they communicate, not necessarily always what they're saying. That's definitely part of it, but actually we're looking for great communicators as a part of our program. And if they're reading a script, as I said, it's just not gonna work for me in quite the same way. So yeah, getting towards more foundational skills and behaviors as opposed to knowledge, which I think can be replicated quite easily, is probably the route to go down. And I agree with you, Emma. I feel like assessments have probably moved from that realm of, like, what is the answer to this, to, tell me how you think, more so than anything else.
I think it's funny because I think the conversation a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, I was definitely part of quite a lot of seminars and webinars that were talking about, are assessment centres dead? Are they a thing of the past? Should we stop using them? But actually, we will now be relying on some of that face-to-face. I mean, it's virtual, but face-to-face interactions with one-to-ones and kind of other elements that will be assessing that authentic part of the candidate and their responses. So, for example, we ask application questions. Yes, absolutely, someone could just be dropping them in ChatGPT and they could be regurgitated, but actually we'll be using them as part of our assessment. So yes, they'll be screened at some point, but then assessors will be aware of them and going, right, okay, you have mentioned this, tell us a little bit more about this, or or somehow using it as part of the interview. So now suddenly that kind of a face-to-face or virtual face-to-face assessment is now not so like dead and buried like we were all thinking a couple of years ago, and it's now going to be even more important to really bring out that kind of true personality, that true candidate. So it's interesting. I find that interesting personally.
And so do a lot of our audience, because that segues lovely conversation into our Q&A, where we've got some fantastic questions submitted mainly around this concept of moving more in person, if there are concerns about the use of ChatGPT or generative AI, and how practical that is, particularly where you might have high volumes and kind of tight on resources. But then if you are using online virtual activities, any tips on designing them to be a little bit better to get to that true authentic candidate, rather than having the use of generative AI just being the cut and paste, as I think Joe was describing it earlier, around the kind of submissions you might already be seeing. So I'll take that in two separate chunks. One, the blend between more in person to try and mitigate the challenges of the use of ChatGPT, etc., for candidates. And then if you're continuing to use virtual online activities, top tips for how to try and make that design be able to get to that true authenticity of the candidate.
I'm going to jump to the second one, which is not in your order, which is annoying.
That's
I know.
fine.
But,
that's fine. We will discuss all.
Top tips for me is similar to what Estelle was saying in her presentation. Is around, maybe we move away from questions or situations where there's a clear right or wrong answer, which is when someone could just be felt like regurgitating something. But actually, and similar to what you were saying, Joe, is it's more around how someone presents themselves, comes across, not necessarily always about exactly what they're saying. So whether we need to use more assessments that are more reactive in the moment, rather than lots of prep, lots of they need lots of previous knowledge, but actually can really give them an opportunity to draw on their own experiences, how they would react in that certain situation. And they can't prepare for it in that same way, because that's similar, to how we would work with our clients. And maybe we need to make sure we do have lots of different scenarios. So there's not lots of materials out there online. People know what questions going to be asked. Maybe we mix them up, and or it be quite kind of conversational and driven by candidates having a chat or an exercise, rather than you ask these set questions and this is literally what it is. Now, I don't have the answers to that. We obviously have our assessment centre this year that is designed already, but that's my thought, is more how we can bounce off a candidate and let the assessment and the conversation flow naturally based on that candidate and the outputs, rather than anything that can just be lifted and shifted that they found online or that they can answer really easily. Doesn't give a solid answer, but those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Emma. And there's definitely a lot of good practice in that comment anyway, because we should be trying to make sure that it's it's not something that people can just pick up off the internet and go, oh yes, I've got the script now, and be able to answer all the questions off pat. But I one of the questions actually that's been posed from the audience takes that idea a little bit further though, and says, well, it's great to get more personal situational examples, but then how do you make sure you're consistently scoring, and how you're fairly and equally scoring, particularly again coming back to that idea of candidates from different backgrounds? And I think that is a real challenge. And again, that's not ChatGPT or generative AI specifically focused. I think that's a challenge regardless for assessment, and good practice around that. So don't know if anyone has any immediate.
But I wonder, sorry, I just totally cut you off. I'm too excited. But then you say,
yeah,
but then there's a tool that PA are using and trialing at the moment called Copilot, which basically is running behind, say, a Teams meeting like this. And it will then summarize at the end and send a summary of this conversation. So then it'll be like, oh, Georgia agreed with what Emma said, and Emma suggested that she would take this action away. It summarizes a meeting, an interview, a conversation, a meeting with a client, whatever it might be, and provides a kind of output of that. Now, whether using something like that within your assessment process will support interviewers with a better way to evaluate a kind of score after, rather than, and again, I don't know how, I don't have all the answers, I haven't thought this through, but it was something that, I thought, is there more tools that we can use in our process to support our interviewers and assessors to make sure that it is free from bias, that there is a script or an output of this conversation that's recorded, and then that is what's used to evaluate a score. And we have kind of scoring criteria around that. Obviously I'm very passionate about making sure that there is no bias in a process and everyone has an equal opportunity, and I hope that many of us are feeling the same and should feel the same. So maybe AI can support us in that way as well. That's just a thought.
I was about to say, I love the neat way of actually turning it back into a resource and tool.
Yeah.
I love that. So you look like you're going to say something as well. Please jump in.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, undoubtedly, AI, they're in many ways a blessing for recruiters and lots of opportunities to use it to improve efficiencies and deliver better outcomes. And I guess it's about finding where it's got that benefit, but understanding what the implications are in terms of getting that authentic insight of candidate when you're thinking about the impact on your the assessment bit. I guess I would, back to the question, I would say on the kind of the idea that we can go back to a world where every single candidate that's interested in joining our organisation can come to an assessment centre and have an in-person experience, I think probably blows the minds of everybody in this webinar. I guess where we see the conversation and where people are moving to that are thinking about this is around getting that balance right in the redesign of their process. So definitely making sure that further down the process, you've got more moving to either in person or thinking about more interactive the role of video interviews and moving away from written. But I think that the area where we're seeing the big change is that because the use of question-based text-based assessments further up the process as that first point of fifth, that's the real challenge. And that is where you think you have to, if it's like, what do you do? You've got to move away from questions and text-based. It's got to be an interactive assessment. And back to some of the points I made about it's going to be non-verbal. There's no right or wrong answer. And I think that's where the kind of the biggest change is. The first moment of change is moving away from question-based, because they are incredibly vulnerable, as our research showed, to being used in a way that prevents you getting that authentic insight into the candidate. And I've had a couple of conversations recently with companies who've come to us because they've had the experience of, they'd used a question-based personality or traditional aptitude or SJT at the top of the funnel, and thought, brilliant, not only have we got loads more candidates applying, and that's because they've used AI tools to do sort of mass applications, but these written applications or these assessment results for written assessments have been great. This is fantastic. We've really upped the quality of who we're attracting. And then they've got to interview or assessment centre stage, and the quality of the candidates that have presented at that stage do not reflect what they saw in further up the funnel. So if you rely too much at the top of the funnel on text-based activities that you can use ChatGPT, we're seeing a gap in quality of what then is in front of them, either in assessment centre or interview. So I think it's about, again, in that redesign, going down that redesign route, it's about thinking, what's right for which stage. I can think of loads of ways that you might want to use AI tools in the assessment centre, but I think you've got to make sure that at that top of the funnel sift, if you've got high volume and you've got, capacity issues and resource pressures, as we all do, that what you're using at that stage, isn't vulnerable to ChatGPT. And I guess that's kind of the core of our council and the conversations that we're seeing out there with people that are thinking about redesign.
And with our application questions, you're right, Estelle, we don't review them until much later on. And candidates have to do our online assessments first. So that gives us that opportunity for us to kind of sift out those candidates that haven't met those behaviours, those strengths that we're looking for. We're not only putting them to those assessments based on an application question. They are later on, much later on in the stages that feed into assessment event if they've got to that point. So it is key that we have managed to kind of filter out any of those candidates before that point, like you say, especially with the high volumes that we use. Because if we were to rely on the application questions, you can guarantee we'd have some brilliant, incredible answers and loads would go through. So yeah, to your point, it's absolutely key that we have those assessments first.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think kind of a multifaceted approach, and also knowing the strengths and weaknesses of each part. You know, like as Emma said, if you know that your first stage is, you know, a CV and cover letter, like it's probably got quite a high chance of some sort of, you know, ChatGPT in there. But then if your next stage is, you know, like we use Arctic Shores as our next stage, that's going to give us an opportunity to then recalibrate and assess against the behaviors that we're looking for. And then our stage after that is a virtual video interview, which again, primarily we're looking for those communication skills. So across that, you know, we're getting a nice blend of assessment, which is then hopefully leading to more well-rounded candidates that are reflective of, you know, the person that they claim to be at the start of the process. And yeah, we kind of go back and take a look at those kind of passions and motivations early on when we get to like assessment center stage. We also, I guess, just going back to the in-person, I don't think we've got, you know, we're kind of a virtual boot camp and we've got no intention of running in-person assessments. We do virtual assessment centers, which are great. And I think we're certainly feeling like, you know, long live the group exercise, quite frankly. I know that a few years ago, as Emma was saying, like maybe those assessments were feeling a little bit like, I don't know what we're getting from this, you know, is this going to a direction that we want? But actually we're now looking for behaviors within a group, and you know, we just kind of set people up into little teams and then just watch them go basically, which is quite interesting. So you get a more authentic view of, you know, how they work, what they're working on, rather than again the actual outcome of the assessment itself, or the project.
Thank you. Sounds like some consensus and some great tips there as well about blending and being conscious of the weaknesses as well as the strengths of each part of your recruitment process. I think that's a really good point to take away. We've got a couple more questions and a few more minutes, so I'm going to jump in, and this is again, Estelle, probably one for you, but in terms of the use of generative AI in the recruitment process, are you seeing any industries or sectors that are more quickly adopting this or less interested in adopting this? We've got somebody here from a law firm who's saying, you know, we consider ourselves to be traditional, but we're really excited about embracing the use of it in our own recruitment processes.
Yes, I think that those sectors that maybe have been using Gen AI or AI in their businesses and kind of touched on this, that, you know, PA Consulting's been doing a lot of thinking about how does it use AI broadly in its organization, might have been a little bit quicker off the mark in then applying that and thinking, well, what might this mean for our recruitment process? But I think that this is something that you know, it cuts across all sectors really. It's certainly in how we're thinking of, you know, the conversation we're having around what does it mean for recruitment. I think it's really all sectors. There's not been a particular one that stands out. I think it might just be more that those sectors that are using AI in their own businesses might feel a little bit more confident to be applying that to recruitment. And I guess actually, you know, that's why we sort of started to think about this idea of conducting a vulnerability audit and tried to put, you know, that slide together with thinking about how might you go about and where do you start? Because we were having quite a lot of conversations, you know, either at events or with our customers, of a little bit of, oh my gosh, what does this all mean? Where do I start? And so we wanted to just, you know, sometimes it's better to like step back a little bit, and also, you know, you don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to rip up everything. I think it's identifying which point might be most vulnerable, and focusing on that. So I hope that answers it doesn't give a clear answer to the sector, but I hope it gives you an insight into some of the conversations that we're having.
And I'm just going to add to that, if that's okay. We have a lot of specialists in the firm, people that work with AI day to day, that know so much more than I could ever know, and are using it and developing codes, and are actually building things for clients. So there's a hackathon taking place this week with our corporate functions, which is not just TA but broader, but asking can we build low code AI solutions to help with writing job descriptions, or PO processes, or whatever. So whether there's a view of in 6 months time, when we start to look ahead for our new early careers process, do we have a hackathon with some of those best kind of minds across our business and go, right, this is our current process, where is it vulnerable, and that's what you're saying, Estelle, where are those kind of pain points, where are those areas that we should change or not change, and maybe those people can help bring some of that because they've got experience. So that's kind of my thought and where I might be taking it, to go, well, who can help me, because I certainly don't have all the answers, and I know that a lot of us don't, but we are aware and we want to do the right thing and we want to embrace it. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm very conscious of time. We're about to hit the hour. So I don't know if each of you would like to maybe just give your final reflections for the audience, and then Estelle will do the closing slide, which I think gives people an opportunity to get to the research via a QR code as well. So I'm going to start with Jo this time. Jo, final reflection from today's conversations.
It's just a very live conversation, isn't it? And I think we're all in the same boat. I think each business needs to take a look at their assessment process, because as we've highlighted, there are massive opportunities for candidates to potentially misrepresent themselves as part of the process. And ultimately what we're trying to do is ensure that the right people end up in the right roles. And so long as we're capable of assessing, what our assessment process is looking for, how vulnerable is it, if we're comfortable and can I kind of accept that risk, then great. And then as things change, we can potentially change with them. I know that, for sure that's the situation that we're in, basically constantly assessing whether or not it feels that there are vulnerabilities and fixing them if we think that they're problematic. At the moment, it feels like it's going okay, but we'll see how we go. I think in the next kind of 12 months, which I'm sure it will be entirely different. ChatGPT 4.5 presumably coming at some point. Who knows? Then there'll be even more to enjoy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jo. Emma, any final thoughts for the audience?
Very, very similar for me. I mean, we don't have all the answers, and I must have said that a million times, and I will absolutely put my hands up and say I don't have all the answers. What I do want to do is increase my knowledge where I can. This research is brilliant. Read any more research that comes out, understand more about how candidates are using it, understand more about how it's evolving within our business, and just constantly assess, like Jo said, our process, and what is it that we actually want to assess from our candidates. What do we need them to be when we want them to land in the business, and actually get that feedback from the business. So do we need to look at assessing something slightly differently? So for me, it's just being aware that it's here, it's not going away, and how do we embrace it, how do we change our processes, and how do we make them as fair and inclusive as possible, because that is my biggest concern, really. So yeah, those are mine.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. And Estelle, over to you.
I guess quite similar. I think there's two things I'd say. One is around the kind of the audit. Start with an audit. I think that would be my top piece of advice. Understand where your vulnerabilities are. Don't panic. Focus on what is most vulnerable. And I think that my second piece of advice would be, we need to make sure that we keep close to the candidates and what they think about it and how they're using it and what their perceptions are. And thinking about that from, a candidate experience perspective of the recruitment process, but just that broader sense of what candidates will expect from a company in terms of embracing AI. So, we need to lean into the direction of travel with candidates and keep them at the heart of what we're thinking about and how we're redesigning our processes to eliminate this new vulnerability that ChatGPT has created. So don't blame the candidates.
Absolutely. Some great final thoughts there, and a great conversation today. Thank you all so much for joining us. And Estelle, thank you for presenting this research. If anybody would like to download the research, there's a QR code on the screen at the moment. We will also be sharing the recording of this webinar. So again, if you don't have your phone to hand, to grab the QR code, or if you want to review any of today's conversation, please look out for that coming out soon. And I will close by saying thank you again so much to both Arctic Shores and Estelle for bringing us this research and this conversation, and to Emma and Joe for their time and sharing with us so much of what they're doing, what they're thinking, but also being very honest and candid about where we all feel we are in the whole generative AI conversation. So thank you all so much, and I wish you all a really great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you
guys.
very much,
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye.